I am Maya, 32 years old, and for my entire life, my family treated me like a financial burden they simply had to tolerate. They summoned me to my mother's house to force me into signing away my only inheritance, completely unaware of the massive Wall Street empire I had built in total secrecy. When my brother mocked me for taking a rideshare claiming I could not even afford a used car, a private corporate helicopter suddenly descended onto my mother's pristine manicured lawn. I buttoned my blazer, looked them dead in the eye, and told them my ride was here. My mother fainted right on the marble floor. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind a toxic family exactly who they are messing with and what happens when they push the family scapegoat too far. Sign the paper, Maya. We are not playing these childish games with you today. My mother Vivian slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto the pristine marble kitchen island of her Atlanta suburban mansion. The sharp slap of the paper echoed through the massive open-concept living space, but it was not nearly as loud as the absolute contempt in her voice. At the very top of that stack was a quitclaim deed. She was demanding that I sign away my 50% legal right to my late grandmother's estate, the only tangible thing my grandmother had left me, so my older brother Marcus could use the property as collateral for yet another one of his failing business ventures. I looked down at the documents, reading the fine print. I understood far better than any of them realized, then looked up at the people surrounding me like a pack of starving wolves. My mother stood with her arms tightly crossed, her expensive designer pearls resting against her chest. Projecting the flawless image of the perfect, respectable church matriarch she fought so desperately to maintain. Beside her stood Marcus, the undisputed golden child of our family. At 35, he was still dressing like a young startup mogul, though his tailored suits and expensive watches were funded entirely by my parents, draining their savings to bail him out of crushing debt. And leaning casually against the custom stainless steel refrigerator sipping a mimosa, with a look of utter boredom, was his wife Chloe. "I am not signing away grandmother's house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of the emotional reaction they were hoping to provoke. It was the only thing she left us, and I know exactly what happens to properties when Marcus uses them as collateral. They disappear. Marcus scoffed, stepping closer to the island to try and physically intimidate me. You do not understand the first thing about real business, Maya. This is a vital bridge loan to expand my logistics company. It is guaranteed money, and as family, you owe it to me to support my vision. You are just being selfish." Chloe let out a sharp, condescending laugh. She swirled the orange juice and champagne in her crystal glass, looking me up and down with an expression of deep pity. Her gaze lingered on my simple black blazer and slacks, clothes she clearly assumed I had dug out of a local discount bin, completely missing the subtle stitching of a bespoke designer. "Oh, leave her alone, Marcus," Chloe drawled, her voice dripping with that specific brand of sweet southern microaggression she always weaponized against me. "You cannot expect Maya to grasp high-level investments or generational wealth. I mean, look at her. She took an Uber to a family function today. It is honestly a little embarrassing having that beat-up sedan pull into our gated community. Maybe if she stopped spending her little freelance money on thrift store clothes and actually worked a real job, she could afford a reliable vehicle like a normal adult." I turned my gaze slowly to my white sister-in-law, letting a cold, calculated silence fill the large kitchen before I finally spoke. "I would not have to take Ubers if your husband had not stolen $40,000 of my college tuition money to pay off his underground gambling debts." The entire kitchen went dead silent. Chloe's smug smirk vanished instantly. Marcus's face turned a violent shade of red, and my mother gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. "You shut your mouth!" Marcus hissed, taking another aggressive step toward me, his hands balled into fists. I did not flinch. I just smiled, leaning my weight against the cold marble island. "Oh, did you not tell your wife about that little detail, Marcus?" I asked, thoroughly enjoying the sheer panic flashing in his eyes. "Did you not tell her how our mother covered up your felony theft by standing up in front of the entire church congregation and lying to protect her precious golden boy? How she told Pastor Davis and everyone else in our community that I was forced to drop out of university because I simply was not smart enough to handle the coursework?" How I had to work 3 minimum-wage jobs cleaning offices at night just to survive while you played the brilliant CEO with my stolen future. That is enough. My father, Thomas, who had been sitting quietly at the dining table ignoring the conflict as usual, suddenly slammed his fist down so hard the expensive silverware rattled against the plates. He pointed a trembling finger directly at me. "You will not speak to your brother that way, and you will certainly not disrespect your sister-in-law in this house. You have always been jealous and bitter of his success." My mother marched right up to my face, her eyes blazing with a furious indignation reserved exclusively for her only daughter. The black tax in this family was apparently only meant to flow in one direction from me to them. "You listen to me very carefully. Maya," she dictated, her voice shaking with rage as she slid a heavy pen across the marble directly into my hand. "We raised you. We put food in your mouth. You owe this family. You are going to sign this deed right now to help your brother secure his future. If you do not put your name on that line this very second, you are permanently disowned. I will cut you out of my will entirely. I will ban you from this house, and you will never be considered a part of this family again. Sign it." The silence that followed my mother's ultimatum hung in the air like thick humidity. Nobody moved. My father simply adjusted his collar, refusing to meet my eyes, silently cementing his role as the ultimate enabler. Marcus, however, saw the silence as an invitation to close the deal. He pushed himself off the edge of the counter and stepped directly into my personal space, invading it with the overpowering scent of his designer cologne. "Are you really going to throw away your only family over pride?" Maya, Marcus asked. His tone shifted from aggressive to that patronizing, faux-concerned voice he used when trying to impress his investors. "Look at yourself. You are 32 years old, scraping by on whatever minimum wage freelance gigs you manage to find on the internet. You do not have a retirement account. You do not have any real assets. I am building a global logistics empire. This bridge loan is going to secure our family name for the next century. But you cannot see past your own petty jealousy to support a black man trying to make history." I stared at the vein throbbing in his neck, remembering the nights I skipped meals so he could have the newest basketball sneakers. The audacity was almost impressive. "You call it an empire, Marcus," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "But an empire built on stolen college funds and our mother's relentless bailouts is just a house of cards waiting for a strong breeze. You have bankrupted 3 separate companies in the last 5 years alone. I know because I watched you forge our father's signature on the second one." Chloe stepped forward, then placing a manicured hand on Marcus's chest to hold him back, though her pale eyes remained locked on me. She gave me that tight, sympathetic smile she reserved for service workers and people she deemed beneath her. "Maya, you really have to understand how high-level finance actually works," she said, speaking slowly, as if explaining basic algebra to a toddler. "In my family, we understand that generational wealth requires sacrifice. We pool our resources to elevate the most capable members. My father always says that true business acumen is knowing when to step aside and let the real players take the wheel. Marcus is a visionary. You unfortunately are stuck in this exhausting, small-minded hustle culture. It is not your fault you lack the pedigree for corporate investments, but holding him back is frankly selfish." She reached out and lightly tapped the side of my handbag, which rested on the marble counter. "It is like this bag, for instance," Chloe continued, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "It is a cute replica, very convincing from a distance. But those of us who grew up around the real thing can spot the cheap stitching immediately. You try so hard to look the part, Maya, but you are entirely out of your depth. Give Marcus the house. Let him do what he does best. And maybe he will put you on his payroll doing data entry or something administrative so you can finally stop struggling." I let her words wash over me. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of a woman who had never worked a day in her life, lecturing a black woman on generational wealth, was staggering. She thought my bag was a knockoff, because in her narrow, privileged mind, there was absolutely no way I could afford a limited edition piece that cost more than her husband's last 3 cars combined. My mother crossed her arms tighter, nodding in furious agreement with her daughter-in-law. "You should be thanking Chloe for her grace, Maya. She is absolutely right. You owe us for every single meal, every piece of clothing, every opportunity you squandered when you dropped out of school and embarrassed me in front of my entire congregation. I had to face Pastor Davis and explain why my daughter was a failure while my son was thriving. Now be a good girl and sign the paper before I lose what little patience I have left. The three of them stood there, forming a solid wall of supreme arrogance. They expected me to break. They expected the tears, the screaming, the emotional breakdown of a scapegoat who had finally been pushed to her absolute limit. They expected me to yield to the immense pressure of the black tax, that unspoken rule demanding I set myself on fire to keep my brother warm. Instead, I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the sharp, predatory grin of a woman who had spent the last decade swimming with sharks on Wall Street and eating them for breakfast. I slowly reached into the very handbag Chloe had just insulted. I did not pull out a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. I retrieved a custom solid gold Mont Blanc fountain pen. It was heavy, perfectly balanced, and engraved with my initials. The sunlight catching the gold barrel made Marcus blink, a brief flash of confusion crossing his face before his massive ego swallowed it whole. Marcus and Chloe exchanged a quick, smug look. They thought they had won. They thought my smile was the bitter resignation of a defeated woman surrendering her last valuable asset. My mother let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief, uncrossing her arms and smoothing down her silk blouse, as if the unpleasant business was finally concluded. Good, my mother snapped. At least you have some sense left in your head. Do it quickly so we can enjoy our brunch in peace. I clicked the cap off the Mont Blanc. The quiet snick sounded incredibly loud in the tense kitchen. I bent over the thick marble island, positioning the tip of the pen directly over the signature line of the quitclaim deed. Marcus leaned in closer, his eyes hungry, literally hovering over my shoulder to watch his financial salvation become legally binding. But I did not sign my name. I did not relinquish a single thing. With deliberate flowing strokes, I wrote a very specific cryptic sentence straight across the dotted line, dragging the wet ink directly through the formal legal jargon. Marcus frowned, his brow furrowing, as he tried to read my handwriting upside down. "Wait, what did you just write?" he demanded, his voice rising in sudden panic. "That is not your signature. What does that say?" He reached out his fingers, grasping for the edge of the heavy legal paper to snatch it away from me. Before his skin could even brush the document, a low mechanical hum vibrated through the floorboards of the mansion. In a fraction of a second, that hum escalated into a deafening, bone-rattling roar. The sound was so massive, so physically overwhelming, that the entire house began to shake. The intense vibration hit the kitchen island like an earthquake. The crystal mimosa glasses Chloe had set out rattled violently against the marble before tipping over, crashing to the floor in a shower of expensive glass and orange juice. My mother screamed, covering her ears. My father jumped out of his dining chair, looking wildly around the room as the walls trembled. The roar grew exponentially louder, drowning out Marcus's frantic questions, completely eclipsing the toxic family meeting. Something massive was descending directly above us, tearing the air apart with the force of a hurricane. The sheer force of the wind slammed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room, threatening to shatter the reinforced glass. The shadow of the massive aircraft darkened the entire kitchen, plunging my stunned family into a temporary eclipse. My mother let out a shrill shriek, abandoning her matriarchal poise entirely as she dove behind the marble island. My father stumbled backward, knocking over a heavy mahogany dining chair in his scramble to get away from the vibrating glass. Chloe threw her arms over her perfectly styled hair, pressing her face against Marcus's shoulder and squealing about the noise damaging her hearing. I simply stood exactly where I was, my hand still resting next to the custom gold pen, completely unbothered by the absolute chaos erupting around me. Marcus was the first to recover his nerve. He shoved Chloe aside and rushed to the expansive windows, his face pressing almost comically against the glass. "Look at the lawn!" he yelled, his voice barely cutting through the deafening roar. "Mom, your landscaping is getting ripped to shreds." I was not exaggerating. My mother had spent over $20,000 importing exotic Japanese hydrangeas and laying down pristine Bermuda grass just to outshine the other wives at her Sunday church services. Now that precious status symbol was being completely obliterated. The sheer downward thrust of the helicopter blades was ripping the expensive flowers straight out of the soil, whipping petals and dirt against the windows like a violent storm. I took my time turning around to watch the spectacle. A massive, sleek, matte black Sikorsky S-76 helicopter was gracefully lowering itself directly onto the center of the ruined lawn. The sunlight caught the side of the aircraft, illuminating a very specific solid gold emblem painted on its tail. It was the crest of Obsidian Capital, the most notoriously ruthless and exclusive private equity firm on Wall Street. A firm that did not just buy companies, but swallowed them whole and liquidated their remains. A firm that I had built from the ground up. My mother peeked over the top of the kitchen island, her eyes bulging out of her head, as she watched her beloved garden turn into a landing pad. "Who in the world is doing this?" she shrieked, her hands gripping the marble edge. "I will sue them. I will have them arrested. Call the police, Thomas." Marcus spun around to face me, his face a twisted mask of confusion and misplaced arrogance. He pointed a shaking finger toward the window. "You are so broke you cannot even afford a Honda and your Uber driver brings a chopper," he yelled, his voice cracking under the strain of his own desperate superiority complex. "What kind of cheap rental stunt is this, Maya? Are you trying to intimidate us with some rented prop you maxed out your credit cards for?" Chloe peeked out from behind him, immediately weaponizing her privilege. "This is exactly what I mean about your financial illiteracy." Maya Chloe scoffed, dusting off her designer blouse. "Real wealth moves quietly. Renting a helicopter for a social media stunt to make yourself look important is just painfully tacky. It is honestly sad that you feel the need to posture like this, just because Marcus asked for what is rightfully his." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of justification. Instead, I slowly pushed myself off the edge of the kitchen island. I reached down and picked up my gold Mont Blanc pen, sliding it seamlessly into the inner pocket of my blazer. With slow, deliberate movements, I buttoned the center button of my tailored jacket. In that single fluid motion, the obedient, quiet scapegoat daughter my family had spent 32 years punching down vanished completely. My posture straightened. The calculated, ice-cold apex predator of Wall Street stepped forward to take her place. I looked Marcus dead in the eye, watching the smirk slowly melt off his face as he registered the sudden, terrifying shift in my demeanor. "My ride is here," I said coldly. The heavy turbines of the helicopter began to wind down, transitioning from a deafening roar to a high-pitched, powerful whine. The thick glass windows stopped rattling, leaving a heavy, suffocated silence in the kitchen. Marcus turned back to the window, his jaw dropping open. The side door of the sleek black helicopter slid open with a mechanical hiss. Two men in sharp tactical suits stepped out first, their eyes scanning the perimeter with military precision. Then the main passenger emerged. He was an older, distinguished white man with silver hair and an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He carried an air of absolute authority, the kind of undeniable power that made politicians and billionaires scramble to answer his phone calls. Marcus slammed his hands against the glass, his breath fogging up the window. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice trembling with a sudden greedy desperation. "That is Elias Sterling." My father practically tripped over his own feet, rushing to the window. "The venture capitalist?" he asked, his eyes wide. "Yes," Marcus gasped, frantically trying to smooth down his wrinkled suit jacket and fix his tie. "He is the founder of the Sterling Global Fund. I have been pitching my logistics company to his executive board for 3 years. They never replied to my emails. He must have read my business proposal. He must have tracked me down. He is here to fund my expansion. I told you I was going to be a titan. I told you." Chloe practically shoved my mother out of the way to get to the window, her eyes gleaming with dollar signs. "Oh, Marcus, this is it!" she squealed, clapping her hands together. I knew my husband was a genius. "We need to go out there and greet him immediately. Show him that southern hospitality." My mother completely forgot about her ruined hydrangeas. She instantly smoothed her hair and puffed out her chest, ready to play the matriarch of a soon-to-be billionaire son. She looked back at me with absolute triumph. "Do you see this, Maya?" she gloated, her voice dripping with venom. "This is what real success looks like. God is rewarding your brother for his hard work while you stand there with nothing." Now get out of the way so Marcus can go welcome his new business partner. But they were all entirely wrong. Elias Sterling stepped off the metal runner of the helicopter and onto the crushed Bermuda grass. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at my mother. He did not even glance at the massive, ostentatious mansion that my family was so proud of. Instead, the legendary billionaire stopped directly in the center of the lawn, folded his hands respectfully in front of him, and looked straight past all of them, fixing his eyes directly on the front door. He was waiting for his boss. How was waiting for me? Marcus did not wait for an invitation. He shoved past the shattered glass on the kitchen floor and practically sprinted out the front double doors. He was smoothing his hair, fixing his tie, and pasting on the fake charismatic smile he used to charm gullible investors. He ran straight toward the massive black helicopter, shouting over the whine of the engines. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus yelled, holding his hand out as he approached the billionaire. "Marcus Vance, we have been trying to connect for years. I am the CEO of Vanguard Logistics. I sent your executive board my expansion proposal last quarter. This is an incredible honor. I knew a man of your vision would recognize the potential in my business model." Elias Sterling did not even blink. He did not extend his hand. He did not slow his stride. He walked forward with such relentless purpose that Marcus had to stumble backward to avoid being trampled. One of the men in the tactical suits simply raised a stiff arm, shoving Marcus aside like he was an annoying fan blocking the sidewalk. Marcus almost tripped over the edge of the ruined flower bed, his outstretched hand hanging awkwardly in the empty air. Sterling marched straight up the front steps, his expensive leather shoes crunching over the debris of my mother's precious landscaping, and walked right through the open front doors of the mansion. He stopped 2 feet away from where I stood. The entire kitchen held its collective breath. My mother was clutching the edge of the marble island, her knuckles turning white. Chloe had her phone half raised, completely frozen. The billionaire lowered his head in a deep, respectful bow. Boss Sterling said, his voice carrying clearly over the residual noise of the helicopter. "The restructuring papers are finalized. I brought the hard copies directly to you just as you requested. I want to personally thank you again. If Obsidian Capital had not stepped in to acquire our debt last night, my entire global shipping empire would have filed for bankruptcy by Monday morning. Your strategic vision saved 20,000 jobs. I owe you my legacy." I nodded, slowly adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. "Good work, Elias. Have the legal team review the final asset transfers on the flight back to New York. I will review them before the market opens." A sharp gasp echoed through the kitchen. It was Chloe. Her mimosa glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, joining the mess of the others. Her pale eyes were wide with absolute terror, darting between the legendary billionaire and the black woman she had just accused of buying thrift store clothes. "What is he talking about?" Marcus stammered. He had scrambled back inside his chest, heaving his face a mask of total panic. "Boss. What do you mean, boss? Maya does freelance data entry. She is broke. She takes ride shares." I finally looked at my brother, letting the full weight of my actual life crush his pathetic illusion. "I do not do data entry, Marcus. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Obsidian Capital. I buy failing corporate empires, strip them down to the studs, and rebuild them for massive profit. I manage billions in assets. And as for the ride shares, I prefer to keep a low profile when visiting Atlanta. It prevents people from begging me for handouts." A sudden gust of wind from the idling helicopter whipped through the open front doors. The powerful draft swept across the marble kitchen island. It caught the heavy legal paper of the quitclaim deed my mother had tried to force me to sign. The document fluttered through the air and landed face up directly at Marcus's expensive leather loafers. I turned my back on them and began walking toward the front door. Chloe suddenly lunged forward, her previous superiority entirely evaporated, replaced by desperate backpedaling. "Maya, wait." Chloe stammered, her voice high and breathless. "I did not mean what I said earlier. I was just stressed about the business loan. You know how family is. We are all just trying to support each other. If your firm is acquiring shipping companies, my father's import business is perfectly positioned for a partnership." I paused at the threshold, turning to look at my white sister-in-law. I let my eyes slowly travel from her desperately forced smile down to her designer shoes, giving her the exact same degrading assessment she had given me 10 minutes ago. "Do not play the family card with me, Chloe," I said, my voice dripping with absolute ice. "Generational wealth is quiet, remember. But since we are sharing financial advice, you should probably know that your father's import business has been operating at a catastrophic deficit for 3 consecutive quarters. He is leveraging his own retirement funds just to keep the lights on. That daddy's money you love to brag about dried up 6 months ago. The only reason you are still wearing those shoes is because you are financing them on credit. Real wealth does not need to belittle people in a suburban kitchen to feel powerful. Have the day you deserve." I turned and walked out the door, striding across the ruined lawn toward the waiting helicopter. Elias Sterling stepped aside, allowing me to board first before taking the seat opposite mine. The tactical security team pulled the heavy sliding door shut with a solid echoing thud. The pilot immediately increased the throttle. The massive jet engines whined louder, preparing for liftoff. Inside the kitchen, Marcus fell to his knees on the hardwood floor. His hands were shaking violently as he picked up the quitclaim deed. He stared at the signature line where he had expected to see my name surrendering my rights to the property. He stared at the wet ink from my solid gold pen. "What does it say?" my mother demanded. She rushed over, leaning heavily over his shoulder, her chest heaving with panic. "Did she sign it, Marcus? Tell me she signed it so we can get this loan." Marcus could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He slowly turned the paper so my mother could see what I had actually written across the dotted line. The helicopter lifted off the ground, the force of the ascent rattling the mansion's windows one final time. As we rose into the air, I looked down through the tinted window and saw the exact moment the truth registered. My mother read the bold, perfectly legible words I had written. "I bought this house in cash 3 years ago. Rent is due on the 1st." Vivian gasped a loud, ragged intake of air that sounded like she was suffocating. Her eyes rolled to the back of her head. Her knees buckled instantly and she collapsed backward, fainting dead away onto the cold marble floor. The sterile scent of bleach and rubbing alcohol replaced the lingering aroma of my mother's shattered mimosa glasses. Inside the private suite at Atlanta General Hospital, the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor filled the heavy silence. My mother lay against the elevated pillows of the hospital bed, a cold compress resting dramatically across her forehead. She clutched the thin cotton blanket with white knuckles, taking shallow, performative breaths as if she had just survived a massive heart attack. The attending physician, a young woman with a thoroughly unimpressed expression, clicked her pen shut and offered a tight professional smile. "Mrs. Vance, all your panels are completely normal," the doctor stated, checking the tablet in her hands one last time. "Your blood pressure is slightly elevated, but there is absolutely no sign of cardiac distress. You experienced a severe panic attack brought on by acute stress. I recommend resting for the remainder of the afternoon, but you are perfectly clear to be discharged." The doctor turned and exited the room, leaving the heavy wooden door to click shut behind her. The moment the latch engaged, the illusion of medical emergency evaporated, entirely replaced by a toxic, frantic panic. My father. Thomas paced the length of the linoleum floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Marcus stood by the window overlooking the hospital parking lot, furiously jabbing his thumb against the screen of his smartphone. Chloe sat in the vinyl visitor chair, aggressively biting her perfectly manicured thumbnail. "How does a freelance designer rent a Sikorsky helicopter?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and absolute denial. He paced away from the window, his eyes glued to his screen. Who was that old man? Why did he call her boss? This has to be an elaborate scam. She probably hired actors to humiliate us. She maxed out her credit cards just to put on a show because she knew she was backed into a corner. "Just search her name," my father snapped, pausing his pacing to glare at his son. "Stop talking and look her up, Marcus. If she is running some kind of scam, the internet will know." Marcus aggressively typed my name into the search engine. I could picture the exact sequence of keystrokes. Maya Vance, Obsidian Capital, Atlanta. He hit search. The color instantly drained from his face. His shoulders slumped forward as if an invisible anvil had been dropped directly onto his spine. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "What is it?" my mother demanded from the bed, tossing the cold compress aside and sitting up straight. "Read it, Marcus. What does it say?" He stared at the screen, his eyes darting back and forth as he scrolled through the flood of search results. Wall Street Journal, Marcus whispered, his voice completely hollow. Forbes magazine. Bloomberg. "Read it!" Chloe shrieked, jumping up from her chair and marching over to grab his arm. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he read the headlines aloud to the sterile room. The apex predator of distressed assets. How Maya Vance built a private equity empire from scratch. Obsidian Capital announces $500 million acquisition. The phone nearly slipped from his trembling fingers. He clicked on a profile piece from a major financial publication and began reading the actual text. Maya Vance, 32, quietly reigns as one of the most ruthless and brilliant minds in the private equity sector. Specializing in hostile takeovers and aggressive corporate restructuring, Vance manages an estimated $2 billion in active assets. Her personal net worth is currently estimated at over $400 million. A suffocating heavy silence crashed down upon the hospital room. The heart monitor beside my mother's bed seemed to beep louder, echoing the frantic racing of their pulses. $400 million. While Marcus was drowning in gambling debts and desperate bridge loans, the sister he had spent his entire life mocking was sitting on nearly $500 million in liquid capital. She was not the Uber passenger. She was the one who could buy the entire rideshare company. The silence was abruptly shattered by a loud theatrical sob. Chloe collapsed back into the vinyl visitor chair, burying her face in her hands. The tears flowed instantly, weaponized and perfectly timed. She curled her shoulders inward, making herself look as small and defenseless as possible. She let out a jagged, hyperventilating gasp, ensuring every eye in the room immediately snapped to her. "She did this on purpose!" Chloe wailed, her voice thick with manufactured devastation. "She sat there in that kitchen and let me talk about my family's business. She let me offer her a job. She let me give her advice about generational wealth, knowing the entire time she had hundreds of millions of dollars. She intentionally set me up to look like an idiot. She is a sociopath. She hates me because of my background, and she wanted to humiliate me in front of all of you." It was a masterclass in manipulation. Rather than addressing the fact that she had just spent the morning actively trying to steal my only inheritance, Chloe immediately flipped the narrative to center herself as the ultimate victim of an aggressive, deceptive black woman. And it worked flawlessly. My father rushed over awkwardly, patting Chloe's shoulder. Marcus dropped his phone onto the side table and fell to his knees beside her chair, wrapping his arms tightly around his weeping wife. "It is not your fault, baby," Marcus soothed, kissing her temple, while his eyes blazed with renewed, misdirected fury. "You were just trying to help her. You offered her a job out of the kindness of your heart. Maya is a snake. She has always been a snake. She hid this from us because she is greedy and bitter." My mother slammed her fist against the hospital mattress. "She is a wicked, selfish girl," my mother hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. $400 million. Do you know what we could have done with that money? Do you know the standing I could have had at the church? She watched her own flesh and blood brother beg for a miserable little bridge loan to save his business, and she sat there hoarding her billions. She owes this family for every meal she ever ate under my roof. She owes you, Marcus. Marcus stood up slowly, his jaw locked. The realization of my wealth was rapidly being replaced by the toxic entitlement of the black tax. In their minds, my money was their money, my success was their safety net. "But I am going to get what is mine," Marcus growled, his eyes narrowing, as a dangerous, desperate idea took root in his mind. "She wants to play corporate raider, fine. We will see how she likes it when her own family plays dirty." He snatched his phone off the side table, his thumb aggressively swiping across the screen. "Before we go after her accounts, I need to secure the bridge loan today. My mother's house is still legally half mine until that deed is signed. I will find a notary who owes me a favor, and we will force the foreclosure hold." He opened the Fulton County Public Property Tax Records database on his browser. If he was going to leverage the mansion, he needed the exact parcel identification number. He typed in the address of my mother's pristine suburban estate. The search engine loaded the page. Marcus scrolled down to the ownership history section. He stopped. He blinked hard, rubbing his eyes as if his vision was blurring. He scrolled back up, his finger freezing on the screen. The blood completely left his face, turning his complexion a sickly ashen gray. "What is it?" Chloe asked, sniffing loudly and wiping a tear from her cheek. "Marcus, what are you looking at?" Marcus could not breathe. He clicked the tab labeled Foreclosure History. The records clearly showed that the bank had seized the property 3 years ago after a massive default on a secret second mortgage. He scrolled to the current owner. The property had been purchased in cash in full by an entity called Obsidian Real Estate Holdings, LLC. He read the note from the quitclaim deed flashing in his mind. "I bought this house in cash 3 years ago. Rent is due on the 1st. The reality of those words broke through Marcus's shock. He dropped his phone, the device clattering against the hospital linoleum. Thomas retrieved it, reading the glowing screen. "What does this mean?" Thomas demanded. "Foreclosure history. Obsidian Real Estate Holdings. Marcus, why does this record say the bank seized your grandmother's house 3 years ago?" Marcus swallowed hard. He backed away. "3 years ago, my logistics startup was bleeding cash." Marcus stammered. "I took out a second mortgage on the house. I missed the payments. The bank initiated foreclosure. They were going to serve the eviction notice on Thanksgiving week." Vivian sat straight up in her hospital bed, her panic attack entirely forgotten. "You mortgaged the house," she shrieked. "You risked the only property this family owns outright." "I was going to pay it back," Marcus yelled. The market shifted. I was terrified. But the eviction notice never came. The bank sent a letter saying the debt was settled by a private holding company. I thought we got lucky. Thomas pieced the brutal puzzle together. "It was not luck," Thomas said. "It was Maya. She bought the debt. She bought the house." Chloe gasped. "That monthly maintenance fee we pay to the neighborhood association," Chloe whispered. "Marcus, you set up the automatic transfers." "It was not going to the association," Marcus confessed. "The routing number belonged to an external management firm. Maya is the management firm. We have been paying her rent for 3 years." The hospital room descended into a toxic silence. Maya's financial rescue should have commanded absolute gratitude. She saved her family from public humiliation and homelessness. She protected her mother's pride, absorbing Marcus's catastrophic failure without breathing a single word of it to the church congregation. But gratitude did not exist in Vivian's vocabulary when it came to her daughter. Vivian threw the blanket off her legs, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. "She treated me like a tenant in my own mother's home," Vivian hissed. "She watched her brother drown in debt while she sat on hundreds of millions of dollars. She let me clip coupons while she bought corporate helicopters." Thomas tried to calm her. "Vivian, she saved the house. If she had not stepped in, we would be on the street." "Do not you dare defend that selfish girl," Vivian snapped. "She did not do it to save us. She did it to control us. She did it so she could sit in her glass tower and look down on the family that gave her everything. I carried her for 9 months. I gave her the foundation she needed to survive in this world. That money belongs to this family. She owes us back pay for every sacrifice I made to raise her." The black tax was being called to collect. In Vivian's mind, Maya's wealth was a communal asset, a limitless bank account that was rightfully theirs to plunder. "How do we get it?" Marcus asked eagerly, moving away from the window, his desperation completely eclipsing his recent humiliation. "Her assets are shielded behind corporate LLCs. We cannot just sue her for cash. She has an army of Wall Street lawyers." "We do not need lawyers," Vivian said, a cold, calculating smile spreading across her face. "We need a crowd. We need the one thing Maya cannot afford to lose now that she is a highly visible corporate executive, her reputation." Vivian grabbed her purse from the side table, her mind already spinning a web of manipulation. "The Excellence in Leadership Church Gala is next Saturday," Vivian declared. "The mayor will be there. The city council will be there. Every major Black business leader and pastor in Atlanta will be sitting at those tables. Maya purchased a platinum sponsor table last month. She will be in the room. I do not understand, Chloe sniffled, adjusting her designer cardigan. How does a church gala help us get the money? Because we are going to corner her. Vivian explained, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. We are going to take the microphone and publicly praise her success. We will announce to the entire congregation that Maya has graciously decided to pledge $5 million to Marcus's new business venture as a testament to her family loyalty. A Black woman of her stature cannot publicly abandon her family in front of the community's elite. If she denies it, she looks like a greedy, heartless pariah. We will shame her into writing the check. She will have no choice but to smile and pay up. Marcus grinned, the heavy weight of his financial ruin momentarily lifting at the brilliance of his mother's trap. It was the perfect scheme. Maya could outsmart them in a boardroom, but she could never outmaneuver Vivian in a church setting where reputation was currency. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of a cell phone shattered the scheming atmosphere. Marcus pulled his device from his pocket. The caller ID displayed the name Preston, Chloe's father. Marcus swallowed hard. Preston was the patriarch of a wealthy old money import-export empire and the primary angel investor keeping Marcus's current logistics company afloat. Marcus answered the call, forcing his voice into a tone of confident, breezy professionalism. Preston, great to hear from you, Marcus said smoothly. Cut the garbage! Marcus, the older man, barked through the phone, his voice loud enough for Chloe to hear. My accountants just audited your quarterly reports. You lied about your revenue streams. Your company is hemorrhaging cash, and my family's investment is tanking. I am pulling my capital by Friday. If I do not see a verified corporate loan guarantee replacing my funds by the end of the week, I am forcing your company into bankruptcy, and I will personally ensure Chloe divorces you. The phone line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. Friday. The church gala was not until Saturday. He did not have time to wait for Vivian's public shaming trap. If he lost Preston's money, his entire life would collapse before the weekend. Marcus turned away from his family, stepping out into the sterile hospital corridor to escape their prying eyes. His hands were shaking violently as he scrolled through his encrypted contacts. He found the number for a shadowy fixer he had used during his underground gambling days. He pressed call, pressing the phone tightly to his ear. Listen to me right now, Marcus whispered into the receiver, his voice dripping with pure, unchecked desperation. How fast can you forge a signature on a corporate loan application? The echo of Marcus making that desperate phone call to his shady fixer was entirely absent from the pristine, climate-controlled lobby of Obsidian Capital. Situated on the top 3 floors of a towering Manhattan glass skyscraper, my firm operated with a serene, lethal efficiency. That silence was violently shattered on a Tuesday morning. My internal communication line buzzed. My head of security, a former Navy SEAL named David, spoke in a tight professional tone. Boss, we have a situation in the main reception area. 3 individuals claiming to be your family bypassed the lobby security desk downstairs by tailgating a catering delivery. They are currently screaming at your receptionist, demanding to see you and threatening to go to the press if we remove them. They are making a massive scene. I pulled up the security camera feed on my monitor. There they were. My mother, Vivian, dressed in her Sunday church best, pointing an aggressive finger at my receptionist. Marcus pacing nervously, sweating through his custom suit, clutching a leather briefcase to his chest like a life raft. And Chloe leaning over the reception desk, utilizing her loudest, most entitled voice to demand immediate service. They had flown to New York under the guise of confronting me about the house. But I knew exactly why Marcus was really here. He needed a corporate guarantor to replace the capital Chloe's father was threatening to pull, and he needed it fast. Send them up to the penthouse, I instructed David calmly. Do not touch them. Escort them directly to my private office. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my tailored suit, and walked over to the private wet bar, situated in the corner of my office. I selected a delicate porcelain teapot, scooped in some imported loose-leaf Earl Grey, and poured the boiling water. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for my guests. The heavy oak doors to my office swung open. Vivian stormed in first, her heels clicking aggressively against the imported hardwood floor. She opened her mouth to launch into one of her trademark tirades about respect and familial duty, but the sheer scale of the room instantly silenced her. My office featured panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows, offering an unobstructed view of the Manhattan skyline. The walls were lined with contemporary art, and the custom mahogany desk at the center of the room commanded absolute authority. For a fleeting second, I saw raw, unfiltered intimidation flash across my mother's face. Marcus and Chloe stepped in behind her, taking in the display of massive, undeniable wealth. Marcus gripped his briefcase tighter, his eyes darting frantically around the room before locking onto my desk. "Please have a seat," I said, my voice completely devoid of hostility. I gestured toward the plush white leather sofas arranged around a low-glass coffee table. "I just brewed some Earl Grey. You all look incredibly stressed. A flight from Atlanta can be so draining, especially when you are flying commercial." I poured 3 cups of tea with terrifying, meticulous politeness. My mother sat down rigidly, refusing to touch the porcelain cup. Marcus sat on the edge of his seat, his leg bouncing with anxious energy. Chloe, however, quickly recovered her arrogant facade. She crossed her legs, picked up her teacup, and offered me a condescending smile. "We did not come here for tea," Chloe said, adopting that sickly sweet tone she always used when she was about to deliver a backhanded compliment. "We came here because your behavior back in Atlanta was deeply concerning. You might have stumbled into some money up here in New York, but playing petty games with your family's housing situation is just tasteless. It lacks class." I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the warmth, and waited for her to dig her own grave. "Marcus is far too noble to say this." Chloe continued, placing a hand on my brother's knee, "but we are actually doing incredibly well. In fact, my family's import and export company is on the verge of closing a massive international logistics contract. We are going to fold Marcus's business into our corporate umbrella. We are talking about an 8-figure expansion. My father is personally overseeing the capital injection." Marcus swallowed hard, looking physically ill as his wife spun this elaborate, desperate fiction. He knew the truth, but Chloe was entirely committed to her performance. "You see, Chloe leaned forward, her pale eyes attempting to pin me down. "That is what real wealth looks like. Real wealth requires family unity. It requires legacy and pedigree. It is about pooling resources and building something sustainable, not resorting to Wall Street tricks and hostile takeovers to steal from your own blood. You could learn a lot from how my family operates. We protect our own. We do not weaponize our bank accounts against each other." I let her finish. I let the absolute absurdity of her white privilege and fake superiority hang in the air of my office. She genuinely believed she was putting me in my place. She genuinely believed her father's old money status gave her the ultimate trump card over a black woman who had built an empire from scratch. I carefully placed my teacup down on its matching saucer. The soft clink was the only sound in the room. "Family unity," I repeated, tasting the words. "An 8-figure expansion. That is a fascinating fairy tale, Chloe. It truly is. But since you are so eager to educate me on how your father protects his own, let us talk about the actual reality of your family's precious legacy." I did not break eye contact with her as I began to recite the numbers purely from memory. "Your father's import business has not turned a profit in 34 months. As of last Tuesday, your accounts payable exceeded your liquid cash reserves by exactly $12.4 million. You have defaulted on 2 major shipping vessels currently sitting in a port in Rotterdam because you cannot afford the docking fees. Furthermore, your father leveraged his own primary residence and your personal trust fund just to make payroll last quarter. He is not injecting capital into Marcus's business. He is threatening to pull his last $2 million out of Marcus's business by this Friday, because if he does not, your entire generational wealth empire will formally file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy." Chloe's smug smile completely collapsed. The teacup in her hand began to rattle violently against the saucer as her hands shook. "You are drowning in debt, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through her like a scalpel. "You are completely bankrupt. And the only reason you flew all the way up to my office is because you and my brother are desperate enough to try and steal from me to save yourselves." Chloe's face drained of color matching the white leather sofa. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. It is fascinating how quickly your superiority complex crumbles when the trust fund runs dry, I said smoothly. You marched into my office trying to lecture me on family unity and class, Chloe. The absolute audacity of it. Let us talk about your version of class. Do you remember your wedding 3 years ago? Marcus stiffened, sensing the impending destruction of his wife's ego, but he remained cowardly silent. I remember it vividly, I continued. I remember how you banned me from being a bridesmaid. You told Marcus my natural hair did not fit your elegant wedding aesthetic. You forced me to sit in the bow, treating your husband's only sister like an embarrassing secret because my blackness did not blend with your country club vision board. You even told the caterers to restrict my champagne. That is not what happened, Chloe whispered, crying. I was just stressed about the photos. You were racist, Chloe, I corrected coldly. You were racist, and my brother was too desperate for your father's wallet to stand up for me. Now you sit in my building begging for money while disguising your desperation as financial advice. You are nothing but a broke entitled fraud clinging to a legacy that no longer exists. Chloe sobbed, deploying her white tears in a desperate attempt to paint me as the aggressor. Right on cue, Vivian let out a sudden, violent hacking cough. It was loud, theatrical, and entirely fake. She clutched her chest, gasping for air as if actively choking on the tea. Maya, please, Vivian wheezed. My chest. I cannot breathe. Get me water quickly. It was a pathetic distraction, a diversion tactic so obvious it insulted my intelligence. But I knew they never created chaos without a motive. I walked slowly toward the wet bar to pour her a glass of water, keeping my back deliberately turned. However, my office was completely encased in floor-to-ceiling reflective glass. As I reached for a crystal tumbler, I kept my eyes locked on the reflection of my mahogany desk. In the mirror-like surface of the window, I watched Marcus move with desperate, frantic speed. He unzipped his leather briefcase, his hands moving like a thief in the night. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. It was a corporate loan guarantee document. I watched him slide it directly onto the center of my desk. But he did not stop there. He pulled out a thin, nearly translucent sheet of tracing paper, placing it meticulously over the signature line of the loan guarantee. Finally, he grabbed the standard non-disclosure agreement. My security team required all visitors to sign upon entering the penthouse, placing it perfectly on top of the tracing paper. The trap was set. Marcus was trying to trick me into signing a routine security document, using the tracing paper to transfer my signature directly onto a multi-million-dollar corporate loan guarantee for his failing business. He needed my signature to secure the capital from the hedge fund, and he was willing to commit federal wire fraud to get it. I filled the crystal glass with ice water, taking a slow, steadying breath. I could have turned around right then and called my elite security team. I could have had Marcus thrown out of the building and arrested for attempted fraud before the ice in my glass even began to melt. But calling the police would only give him a chance to play the victim. Vivian would cry to the church congregation that I was a heartless corporate monster who jailed her own flesh and blood. Chloe would run to the media spinning a story about a misunderstanding. No. A quick arrest was far too merciful for what they had put me through. If Marcus wanted to play a high-stakes game of corporate espionage, I was going to let him dig a hole so deep he would never see sunlight again. He thought he was outsmarting his little sister, completely forgetting that he was sitting in the office of a woman who orchestrated hostile takeovers for a living. I turned around holding the glass of water. I walked back to the seating area and handed it to my mother, who magically stopped coughing the moment the glass touched her lips. Thank you, Vivian muttered, refusing to look me in the eye. I walked back behind my desk. Marcus was sweating profusely, his eyes darting between my face and the stack of papers he had just tampered with. He looked like a cornered animal, entirely unaware that he had just stepped into a cage built by an apex predator. I see you brought the security non-disclosure agreements from the lobby, I said, my voice smooth and pleasant. David must have asked you to bring them up for my final approval. Marcus nodded quickly, his voice cracking. Yes. Your security guy said you needed to sign them before we could officially discuss any family business. Just standard procedure. I looked down at the stack of papers. The edge of the tracing paper was barely visible beneath the NDA. It was a sloppy job. I reached into my blazer and pulled out my custom solid gold Mont Blanc fountain pen. I clicked the cap off, the sharp sound echoing in the tense silence of the office. Marcus held his breath. Chloe stopped crying, her eyes locked on my hands. My mother gripped her water glass. They were all holding their collective breath, waiting for their salvation. I looked right back at Marcus, flashing him a warm, trusting smile. I pressed the gold nib of the pen firmly against the paper, applying extra pressure to ensure the ink transferred perfectly through the tracing paper and onto his fraudulent loan guarantee. I deliberately and willingly signed my name right over his trap, giving him exactly what he thought he had won. 2 weeks passed since I handed my brother the rope he would eventually use to hang himself. Tonight was not about Wall Street. Tonight was about Atlanta. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was completely transformed for the annual Excellence in Leadership Gala. This was the undisputed pinnacle of Black high society in the city. Every prominent pastor, city council member, and legacy business owner was dressed to the nines, sipping expensive champagne under the massive crystal chandeliers. As the primary sponsor and the newly announced guest of honor, I stood near the center of the room, wearing a custom emerald green gown that commanded immediate attention. The mayor himself was standing next to me, discussing a community development initiative I was funding for underprivileged neighborhoods. The evening was flawless, a perfect reflection of the empire I had built. Until the heavy brass doors of the ballroom swung open. I did not even have to turn around to know she had arrived. I could feel the sudden toxic shift in the room energy. Vivian strode into the ballroom, wearing an ostentatious silver sequined dress, her neck heavy with the diamond tennis necklace she bought using my stolen college fund years ago. Thomas trailed slightly behind her, anxiously adjusting his rented tuxedo, while Marcus walked beside her with his chest puffed out. He was wearing a brand new custom suit, undoubtedly purchased with the fraudulent hedge fund money he thought he had successfully secured. They were absolutely not on the guest list. My security team caught my eye from across the room, tapping their earpieces, waiting for my signal to physically remove the crashers. I gave a subtle shake of my head. Let them dig their graves. Vivian did not waste a single second. She immediately intercepted Reverend Jenkins, the most influential pastor in our district. I watched her practically corner the poor man, her voice booming over the smooth jazz playing in the background. She was making sure everyone within a 50-foot radius could hear her performance. "Oh, Pastor, you just have to look at what the Lord has done," she proclaimed, waving a manicured hand in my general direction. I always knew my strict parenting would pay off. I kept that girl in church every Sunday. I instilled that relentless work ethic in her. People see a billionaire today, but they do not see the mother who broke her back to build that foundation. Without my guidance, Maya would still be completely lost. The sheer audacity of her lies was suffocating. She was standing in a room full of people she had previously lied to, the same people she had told I was a college dropout who could not handle basic coursework. She was the woman who told the church prayer circle I was possessed by a spirit of laziness, when I was actually working the night shift at a diner to replace the tuition Marcus stole. Now that my net worth was public knowledge, she was aggressively rewriting history to position herself as the sole architect of my corporate empire. Marcus caught my eye and smirked, clearly feeling invincible. He whispered something to Vivian, pointing toward where I stood with the mayor. Vivian smiled with pure predatory glee. This was the exact moment she had been planning since the hospital. The public shaming. The ultimate black tax collection executed in front of the city's most powerful figures. She marched directly across the ballroom floor, parting the crowd of elites, pulling Marcus along with her by the arm. "Mayor Bradley, what an absolute blessing to see you tonight," Vivian interrupted, inserting herself forcefully into our private circle without a hint of hesitation. "I hope my brilliant daughter has been entertaining you properly. We are just so incredibly proud of her success. In fact, Maya is so dedicated to uplifting Black businesses that she has a very special announcement to make tonight." Vivian turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine with a cold, terrifying threat disguised as a motherly smile. She knew I could not cause a scene here. She was banking on my professionalism to trap me. Tell the mayor about the $5 million pledge you are making to your brother and his new logistics venture, Maya, she said loudly. Tell everyone how you are keeping the wealth in the family and supporting your own blood. The surrounding guests went entirely silent. Pastor Jenkins, the city council members, and the mayor all looked at me expectantly, ready to applaud this beautiful display of familial generosity. Vivian had boxed me into a corner perfectly. If I said no, I was the greedy, arrogant billionaire turning her back on her own struggling brother in front of our entire community. Marcus stood taller, practically vibrating with excitement as he waited for his massive payout. I looked at the expectant faces of the Atlanta elite. Then I looked directly at my mother. I let a warm, radiant, and utterly ruthless smile spread across my face. I reached out and gently took her hands in mine, squeezing them just tight enough to let her know she had made a fatal miscalculation. "I am so glad you brought this up, Mom," I said, projecting my voice, so it carried clearly to the surrounding crowd. "Because your charitable heart is exactly what this city needs to see. Mayor Bradley, my mother is being far too modest today." When I told her about Marcus and his new venture, she flat out refused to let me pay for it. She insisted on being the primary investor herself. Vivian dropped her smile. Marcus frowned, taking a step forward. In fact, she loves her son so much that she is officially auctioning off her entire diamond jewelry collection tonight, starting with that magnificent necklace she is wearing right now to personally fund his business, I announced loudly. She told me earlier that material possessions mean absolutely nothing compared to supporting her golden child. Vivian froze. Vivian stood paralyzed under the sparkling chandeliers of the St. Regis ballroom. The applause of the Atlanta elite washed over her like pure acid. Mayor Bradley was clapping, oblivious to the psychological warfare unfolding in front of him. Marcus grabbed his mother by the elbow, forcibly dragging her and Chloe away from the center of the room before Vivian could completely humiliate herself. He shoved them toward the dimly lit mahogany bar at the far edge of the ballroom, desperate to escape the suffocating public spotlight. Marcus ordered a double bourbon, his hands shaking uncontrollably with humiliation and raw anger. I had played them with absolute precision, turning their malicious public shaming tactic into a weapon that burned Vivian to ash. Chloe was seething, pacing back and forth, whispering frantically about how disrespectful I was to embarrass her mother-in-law in front of the entire congregation. She was playing the victim again, completely ignoring the fact that they had ambushed me first. Just as Marcus threw back his bourbon, his cell phone vibrated violently against his chest. He pulled the device out, his eyes narrowing defensively at the glowing screen. The defeated expression on his face shifted in a fraction of a second. The deep lines of stress around his mouth vanished entirely, replaced by an expression of manic euphoria. He almost dropped his empty glass on the bar. It was an encrypted email notification from the anonymous New York hedge fund he had been courting. The subject line read, "Approved." The body of the message confirmed the unbelievable news. A $10 million wire transfer had successfully cleared the international banking filters and settled directly into the primary corporate accounts of Chloe's family import and export business. The massive loan, secured entirely by the forged signature of Maya Vance, had been legally verified and executed. Marcus gasped, slapping his palm hard against the surface of the bar. He shoved the phone screen directly into Chloe's face, his finger tapping wildly against the display. "Look at the numbers, Chloe," he hissed, his voice vibrating with desperate triumph. "Look at the account balance. We did it. The funds are cleared." Chloe read the notification, her pale eyes widening. The sudden influx of $10 million meant her father's failing business empire was instantly saved. Her fragile illusion of generational wealth was temporarily secured, entirely funded by the massive fraud her husband had just committed against me. She let out a sharp laugh, completely forgetting the profound embarrassment of Vivian's diamond necklace disaster just moments prior. Chloe grabbed a fresh crystal flute of champagne from a passing waiter and turned her gaze back across the crowded ballroom. She eagerly searched the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits until she spotted me. When our eyes finally met across the vast expanse of the room, Chloe lifted her glass high into the air. She flashed me an arrogant, victorious smirk, her white privilege radiating from every pore. In her mind, she and Marcus had successfully swindled her black sister-in-law out of $10 million without me realizing it. She honestly thought she had won the ultimate game of corporate chess and securely saved her family legacy using my stolen signature. I was standing on the elevated VIP balcony looking down at the packed ballroom floor. I watched Chloe toast to the empty air, her face glowing with unearned pride. I did not glare. I did not frown. I simply raised my own glass in a silent, lethal acknowledgement of her celebration. A tall, sharply dressed woman stepped out of the shadows of the mezzanine and joined me at the velvet railing. It was Sarah, the Chief Operating Officer of Obsidian Capital, and my most trusted corporate strategist. She adjusted her glasses, looking down at Marcus and Chloe laughing by the bar. Did they take the bait? Sarah asked, her voice low, clinical, and completely devoid of emotion. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, watching my brother hug his wife in a display of pure criminal joy. They swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker, I replied coldly. Sarah smiled, pulling a slim tablet from her clutch purse. She tapped the screen twice. The funds have been successfully wired from our shadow subsidiary. The receiving bank has confirmed the deposit. They have already started moving the capital to cover their outstanding international shipping debts. I nodded, watching my brother celebrate his own absolute destruction. He was dancing on a trapdoor, completely oblivious to the fact that I held the lever. The anonymous hedge fund that Marcus had desperately sought out, the shadowy firm he had submitted my forged loan guarantee to, did not exist as an independent entity. It was a shell company, meticulously crafted and entirely owned and operated by Obsidian Capital. I had just lent my brother $10 million of my own personal wealth. By accepting that wire transfer tied directly to my forged signature, Marcus had officially committed federal wire fraud. But more importantly, the specific contract he blindly signed to get the cash contained a highly aggressive corporate clause. By defaulting on a single payment, or if the guarantor chose to validate the debt, the lender had the right to seize all collateral immediately. Chloe was smirking because she thought she had outsmarted me. She had absolutely no idea that I was the anonymous lender. I was now the sole undisputed creditor of her entire family empire. I completely owned their debts, I owned their assets, and I owned their future. I turned away from the balcony railing, handing my empty glass to a passing waiter. Marcus wanted to play Wall Street games, but he lacked the fundamental understanding of how true power operated. I was going to let them spend the money. I was going to let them feel safe. And then I was going to take absolutely everything from them without hesitation. Exactly 1 month later, the illusion of untouchable wealth inside Chloe's family estate shattered with the force of a wrecking ball. The $10 million lifeline Marcus had secured felt like a massive, victorious vindication for exactly 3.5 weeks. They spent that time hosting lavish dinners, bragging to their country club friends about their brilliant financial maneuvering and celebrating their supposed genius. Then, a catastrophic shipping error brought their entire import and export empire to a grinding, brutal halt. It was not a random accident or a stroke of bad luck. It was a surgical strike. I had made a single quiet phone call to one of my subsidiaries, instructing them to instantly withdraw our key maritime supply contracts from Chloe's father's logistics network. The withdrawal caused a massive, unstoppable chain reaction across the industry. Ships were left stranded at international customs, lucrative warehouse contracts were voided overnight, and their primary revenue stream dried up in a matter of hours. Without that vital cash flow, the first mandatory installment on their $10 million corporate loan bounced due to insufficient funds. I was sitting at my mahogany desk in Manhattan, sipping my morning espresso, when the automated alert popped up on my monitor, indicating the missed payment. Down in Atlanta, pure panic was setting into the bones of my brother and his wife. Marcus and Chloe were sitting in the aggressively opulent home office of Chloe's father, staring at a thick cream-colored envelope that had just been delivered by a certified legal courier. Inside was a formal notice of default. The legal language printed on the heavy cardstock was stark and terrifying, threatening immediate and aggressive legal action for the missed payment. But Marcus was not sweating. In fact, he was leaning back in the plush leather executive chair, a smug, arrogant grin plastered across his face. He tossed the notice onto the desk and let out a dismissive laugh. Chloe was pacing the length of the room, her designer heels clicking frantically against the imported hardwood floor. She was absolutely terrified of her father finding out about the bounced payment. She knew her family's generational wealth was already hanging by a thread, and this default would expose their complete bankruptcy to the entire high society circle they desperately tried to impress. But Marcus stood up, grabbed her hands, and pulled her into a reassuring embrace. He told her there was absolutely nothing to worry about. He reminded her of his brilliant, flawless plan. He had forged my signature on the loan guarantee right inside my own office. In his delusional mind, the anonymous hedge fund did not care about their missed payment or their failing shipping routes. They would simply pivot and aggressively attack the guarantor. They would go after my assets, my bank accounts, and my penthouse. Marcus firmly believed he had secured 10 million free dollars while simultaneously orchestrating my absolute financial ruin. It was the ultimate revenge for his bruised ego, a way to put me back in my place while saving his white wife's family legacy. He picked up his smartphone, confidently dialing the contact number for the hedge fund listed at the bottom of the default notice. He intentionally put the call on speakerphone so Chloe could hear the glorious moment her family was absolved of all financial responsibility. A cold, highly professional voice answered the line. It was David, my head of security, acting as the designated account manager for our shadow subsidiary. Marcus introduced himself, his voice dripping with unearned confidence and entitlement. He casually acknowledged the missed payment, waving it off as a minor clerical error caused by a temporary banking glitch. Then he delivered what he thought was his masterstroke. He explicitly instructed the firm to bypass his company's assets entirely and execute the financial collection directly against the primary guarantor, Maya Vance. He stated that I possessed more than enough liquid capital to cover the default, and that my signature legally bound me to absorb the massive financial hit. He even threw in a petty comment about how I was a ruthless corporate executive who could afford to lose a few million. Marcus leaned back, smiling at Chloe, waiting for the account manager to confirm that my accounts were being actively frozen. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. Chloe stopped, pacing her breath, catching in her throat, as the quiet tension filled the office. When David finally spoke, his voice was laced with a chilling mechanical precision that made the blood freeze instantly in Marcus's veins. David informed him that the firm would not be pursuing the guarantor under any circumstances. Marcus sat up straight, his smile vanishing as confusion morphed into rising panic. I demanded to know why, shouting into the phone that my signature was clearly on the dotted line of the legal contract. David calmly explained the brutal reality of the trap Marcus had blindly signed. He stated that the guarantor had explicitly waived her personal protection clause prior to the final execution of the document. By doing so, she legally triggered an immediate cross-default seizure clause embedded deep within the fine print. The clause bypassed her liability entirely and authorized the creditor to instantly and aggressively seize 100% of the borrower's assets upon a single missed payment. David's voice echoed through the speakerphone, delivering the fatal, uncompromising blow. He announced that as of this exact moment, all of Chloe's family corporate accounts, their global real estate holdings, and Marcus's personal banking portfolios had been completely frozen and legally seized. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping to her knees on the imported rug as the reality of her family's total annihilation set in. Marcus stared at the glowing phone screen in pure, unadulterated horror, finally realizing that the brilliant trap he thought he set for me was actually his own execution. The echo of Chloe's scream had barely faded before the brutal reality forced an emergency convergence. 48 hours later, the atmosphere inside the flagship boardroom of Preston Global Imports was suffocatingly toxic, practically choking the executives. Preston, Chloe's father, paced the length of the room with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. His face was a violent shade of crimson. His wife sat rigidly in a high-backed leather chair, clutching a string of heirloom pearls to her chest. Marcus stood near the presentation screen, sweating through his custom shirt. He was desperately waving a laser pointer at the blank wall, stammering out a series of fragmented, nonsensical excuses that no one believed. "You promised me this hedge fund was a secure bridge loan," Preston roared, slamming his palms down. My accounts are frozen. The port authorities are seizing my shipping containers in real time. My estate has a lien on it. You assured me she was the one taking the risk, not us. I did, Marcus pleaded, wiping sweat from his forehead. I swear to you, Preston, I put the liability entirely on Maya. The bank was supposed to liquidate her firm. There must be a clerical error. We just need to clarify the guarantor waiver. Chloe was sobbing openly now. The elegant woman who had marched into my penthouse to lecture me on family unity was gone. She was reverting to her most practiced defense mechanism, weaponizing her distress to manipulate the room. Daddy, it is. Maya Chloe wept. She is vindictive. She has always been jealous of our family's legacy. She is doing this to destroy us because she hates that Marcus married into a prominent family. Preston scoffed, his upper lip curling in disgust. I knew we should never have let your kind mix with our business operations. Preston spat, glaring directly at Marcus. You came to us playing the brilliant entrepreneur, but you are nothing but a street hustler. If you do not unfreeze my assets by noon, I am having you arrested. Before Marcus could formulate another pathetic lie, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open with enough force to crack the brass hinges. The frantic shouting died instantly. I walked into the room flanked by Sarah, my chief operating officer, and a team of razor-sharp corporate litigators in immaculate black suits. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, announcing the arrival of the apex predator. I wore a tailored crimson suit, a deliberate choice that signaled absolute power. Preston straightened up, his face contorting with visceral outrage. He looked me up and down, his eyes dripping with the kind of wealthy, prejudiced dismissal I had spent my entire life dismantling. Who the hell let you in here? Preston demanded. This is a closed shareholder meeting for Preston Global Imports. Get out of my boardroom before I have my security team physically remove you. Marcus practically jumped over his own feet. You have crossed the line, Maya, Marcus yelled, his voice echoing shrilly against the glass walls. You think you can just barge into a corporate headquarters because you are throwing a tantrum? I am calling the police. I am having you charged with trespassing right now. I did not flinch at his threats. I simply smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made Marcus instinctively take a step backward. I approached the mahogany table directly facing Preston and his panicked son-in-law. Call them, Marcus, I challenged, softly keeping my gaze locked on his terrified eyes. Let us show them the surveillance footage from my penthouse. The footage that clearly captures you slipping tracing paper under a document to forge my signature on a federal loan application. Marcus choked on his own breath, his hand freezing halfway to his pocket. The blood drained from his face as the crushing reality of my surveillance system finally registered in his hollow brain. Chloe leaped up from her chair, her tears magically vanishing as pure rage took over. You set him up, Chloe screamed, pointing an accusing finger at me. You tricked him into taking that money just to ruin my father. You are a disgusting, manipulative thug. I turned my attention to Chloe, maintaining my absolute composure. I did not trick him, Chloe. He walked into my office and tried to steal from me, just like he stole my college tuition money to pay off his gambling debts 10 years ago. The only difference is, Vivian is not here to cover up his crimes. You wanted a lesson in generational wealth. You are about to get a masterclass. Preston slammed his hand on the table again, clearly losing the very last shred of his aristocratic composure. I do not care about your petty family drama, Preston bellowed, his face inches from mine. I care about my frozen accounts. I do not know what kind of ghetto revenge fantasy you think you are playing out here, but you have no jurisdiction in this building. You are trespassing on private property. Leave immediately, or I will physically remove you myself. I did not break eye contact with the furious patriarch. I simply raised 2 fingers in the air, signaling my legal team to execute the final blow. Sarah stepped forward with lethal precision. She slammed a massive 500-page legal dossier onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud echoed through the boardroom like a judge's gavel finalizing a death sentence. I pulled out the high-backed leather chair at the head of the table, the exact seat traditionally reserved for Preston himself, and sat down gracefully. I crossed my legs, folding my hands over the pristine crimson fabric of my suit. I looked at the stunned, completely silent room, savoring the absolute destruction of their unearned entitlement. My reign had officially begun. I am not trespassing here, I calmly stated to him. I own the building. And as of 900 a.m. today, I own this entire company. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Preston stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to process the total annihilation of his life's work. I did not give him time to recover. I snapped my fingers. Sarah stepped forward, tapped a command into her tablet, and the massive glass windows of the boardroom instantly frosted over, plunging the room into darkness. A hidden projector hummed to life, beaming a towering, high-resolution image directly onto the far wall. There it was, the $10 million loan guarantee, bearing the seal of my shadow hedge fund, and my very own signature at the bottom. Marcus scrambled back from the table, knocking his heavy leather chair to the floor. His panic morphed into a wild, manic desperation. He pointed a trembling finger at the projection screen. "That is fraud!" Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking violently. "That is a fraudulent document. You are trying to steal this company with fake paperwork, Maya. I know for a fact that signature is forged because you never signed that specific paper. You are orchestrating a massive financial scam, and I am calling the authorities right now. I will have you arrested for corporate theft and fraud. You are going to prison." I was practically hyperventilating, pulling his phone from his pocket, genuinely believing he had just caught me in a legal trap. He thought his own crime was his ultimate shield. He thought I had backed myself into a corner by enforcing a forged document. I rested my chin on my folded hands, watching his pathetic performance. "Put the phone down, Mark," I commanded, my voice slicing through his hysterical shouting. "You really should learn to look around a room before you start committing felonies." I nodded to Sarah. She tapped her tablet a second time. The image of the loan document vanished immediately, replaced by crystal-clear, high-definition video footage. The video showed my ultra-modern Manhattan penthouse office from 2 weeks ago. The camera angle was perfect, capturing the entire room from a discreet vantage point above my wet bar. The audio was flawless. The boardroom echoed with the sound of Vivian hacking and coughing, performing her theatrical distraction. Then the focus of the video zoomed in cleanly on my mahogany desk. Every single person in the boardroom watched in muted horror as the footage displayed Marcus moving with frantic, thieving speed. The high-definition resolution captured every detail. It showed him unzipping his briefcase. It showed him pulling out the blank corporate loan guarantee. It showed him sliding the translucent tracing paper directly over the signature line and carefully placing the security non-disclosure agreement on top. It captured the exact, undeniable moment he engineered the forgery. The video paused, freezing on a tight shot of Marcus's sweating face as he set the trap. Preston staggered backward, clutching his chest, as if he had been physically shot. He looked at his son-in-law with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You forged it." Preston gasped, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "You forged the signature of a billionaire private equity CEO to secure our capital. You absolute fool. You have destroyed us." Marcus dropped his phone. It hit the marble floor with a loud crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken glass. He could not tear his eyes away from the frozen projection of his own crime. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my crimson suit. I walked around the edge of the mahogany table, my heels clicking, methodically pacing like a predator circling a wounded animal. "You see, Marcus," I said, my tone conversational but laced with absolute venom. "I did not report your little arts and crafts project to the authorities. I did not call the police to report a forgery. I validated it. I personally authorized the disbursement of $10 million across state lines based entirely on that piece of paper. By executing that transfer, you did not just lie to your father-in-law. You committed federal wire fraud." I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of him. Marcus was shaking so violently, I could hear his teeth chattering. "Federal wire fraud carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in a federal penitentiary," I explained coldly, "and that is per count. Since the money was moved through 3 different international holding accounts to reach Preston Global Imports. My legal team has outlined exactly 3 counts of wire fraud. You are looking at the rest of your natural life in a concrete cell." I gestured to my lead litigator. He stepped forward, opening the massive dossier on the table. He slid a single legally binding contract toward Marcus. Here is your double bind, I announced. You are going to sign over every single share, every voting right, and every physical asset of this company to Obsidian Capital immediately. You will surrender total ownership to me without a fight. If you hesitate for even 1 second, my legal team will walk out of this building and hand that unedited high-definition video directly to the Department of Justice. Choose right now, Marcus. Surrender the Empire or go to federal prison. The room erupted. Chloe lunged at Marcus, her manicured hands curling into claws as she shoved him hard against the projector screen. "You stupid ghetto hustler!" Chloe screamed, her face contorted with absolute fury. "You ruined my family. You destroyed my generational wealth. I gave you everything and you dragged us into your pathetic criminal lifestyle. I hate you. I am divorcing you today." Marcus cowered against the wall, trying to shield his face from his wife's frantic blows. Preston sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands, completely broken. Chloe suddenly stopped hitting Marcus. The harsh reality of her situation clicked into place. Her father was bankrupt. Her husband was a felon. She had absolutely nothing left. She slowly turned around to face me. The aggressive, entitled woman who had insulted my natural hair and mocked my clothing evaporated entirely. She dropped to her knees right there on the boardroom floor. The tears began to flow instantly, weaponized and desperate. "Maya, please," Chloe begged, her voice cracking as she crawled slightly closer to where I stood. "Please have mercy on us. I had no idea he was doing this. I swear to you, I did not know he forged the document. We are family, Maya. Sister to sister. I am begging you not to take my father's company. I will do anything. I will make Marcus sign whatever you want, just leave my family out of this." I looked down at her tear-stained face, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. Her white tears had no power here. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a single crisp white envelope. I crouched down so I was exactly at her eye level, looking directly into her panicked, pleading eyes. I did not say a word about mercy or sisterhood. I just slid the pristine envelope across the polished marble floor until it stopped right against her designer shoes. Chloe stared down at the pristine white envelope resting against the pointed toe of her designer shoe. Her manicured hands shook violently as she reached for it, her tear-stained face contorted with a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope. In her deeply privileged mind, she honestly believed my silence was a sign of surrender. She thought she had successfully weaponized her fragile tears to manipulate the angry black woman into submission. She frantically tore the thick paper open, expecting to find a settlement, offer a restructured payment plan, or a generous contract releasing her father from his crushing debt. Instead, she pulled out a heavy legal document bearing the raised red seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. Chloe scanned the bold printed text at the top of the page. Her breath hitched. The remaining color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow porcelain doll. She dropped the document onto the marble floor as if the paper itself had physically burned her fingers. "What is it?" Marcus demanded, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, completely abandoning any remaining shred of his entrepreneurial dignity, to snatch the document off the floor. "It is not a peace offering," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling with absolute horror. "It is an eviction notice." I remained standing perfectly still, looking down at my older brother as his eyes frantically darted across the legal text. It was a formal court-ordered 24-hour eviction notice authorized by a superior court judge. It mandated the immediate removal of all occupants and their personal property from the Atlanta mansion. The same mansion Marcus had illegally tried to use as collateral. "You wanted to lecture me on protecting generational wealth, Chloe," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the boardroom. "I decided to take your advice. I am cleaning house, starting with the removal of the toxic parasites occupying my real estate. Your husband thought he could steal from me to save your family legacy. Instead, he just rendered his own mother completely homeless." Marcus crushed the eviction notice in his fist. He looked up at me, his face twisting with a mixture of raw terror and childish rage. "You cannot do this, Maya," he yelled, spitting the words out. "Mom is going to have a heart attack. You are destroying your own blood. You are a monster." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I was not the victim anymore, and I was done letting him control the narrative. "Do not you dare speak to me about destroying blood," I said, my voice low and lethal. "I spent my entire life taking the fall for your pathetic failures. You want to talk about monsters, Marcus? Let us talk about the time you stole my identity, when I was 19 years old, racking up $20,000 in credit card debt to fund your luxury lifestyle while I ate ramen noodles in a freezing dorm room. Let us talk about how you stood silently in the kitchen, watching our mother kick me out into the street because acknowledging your massive gambling addiction would have ruined her perfect image at the church. You fed me to the wolves every single time it benefited you. You played the golden child while secretly bleeding our family dry." Marcus shrank back against the base of the mahogany table. "You are not a visionary," I continued, dismantling his entire existence piece by piece in front of his wealthy white in-laws. "You are a chronic, incompetent fraud. You have never succeeded at a single thing in your entire life without stealing the foundation from a black woman. You stole from our mother, you stole from me, and today you tried to steal from a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. Your run is over." Preston, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally stood up. His face was a mask of pure aristocratic disgust. He looked at Marcus not as a son-in-law, but as a diseased rat that had somehow sneaked into his pristine corporate headquarters. "You are done," Preston spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You are entirely stripped of your title, your salary, and your access to this building. You are no longer affiliated with this company in any capacity. If you ever set foot on my property again, I will personally see to it that you are charged with criminal trespassing before the federal agents even arrive to arrest you for wire fraud." Preston turned to his daughter, pointing a demanding finger at her. "Get up, Chloe. Stop groveling on the floor like a peasant. We are leaving." Chloe scrambled to her feet, wiping her tears away. The reality of her situation had finally crystallized. Marcus was not a brilliant CEO experiencing a temporary cash flow problem. He was a sinking ship. He had zero assets, federal felony charges looming over his head, and he did not even have a place to sleep tonight. In the ruthless world of high society, a liability like Marcus was worse than dead. Chloe looked at her husband with absolute revulsion. She reached down and violently grabbed his wrist, prying his hand away when he tried to reach for her. She pulled the massive diamond engagement ring and the matching platinum wedding band off her finger. "You lied to me," Chloe screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You told me you were building an empire. You are just a broke, pathetic criminal. I am filing for divorce this afternoon. My lawyers will strip you of whatever pennies you have left." She hurled the heavy diamond rings directly at his chest. They bounced off his custom suit jacket and clattered loudly across the boardroom floor. Chloe turned her back on him completely, marching out the double doors right behind her furious parents. They abandoned him instantly, severing their ties with surgical precision. Marcus was left sitting on the floor, completely alone in the massive corporate boardroom. He was stripped of his wife, stripped of his fake business empire, and stripped of his home. He had absolutely nothing left. I signaled to Sarah and my legal team to pack up the dossiers. We had secured the company and executed the hostile takeover flawlessly. I did not spare Marcus another glance as I turned to leave him wallowing in the ruins of his own making. Suddenly, a sharp, shrill ringing pierced the dead silence of the room. It was Marcus's cell phone vibrating aggressively in his suit pocket. He pulled it out with trembling, unresponsive fingers. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dim room. It was Vivian. Marcus mechanically swiped the screen to answer, bringing the phone to his ear. He did not even have a chance to speak. My mother's hysterical screaming poured out of the phone speaker loud enough for everyone in the room to hear clearly. "Marcus, help me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with absolute panic. "There are police cars parked all over the lawn. The sheriff is standing at the front door with a court order. They are dragging my furniture out into the street. Marcus, they are evicting us." The frantic sound of Vivian screaming through the phone speaker was suddenly drowned out by the piercing wail of police sirens. 900 miles away from the silent Manhattan boardroom, the reality of my absolute power was violently tearing through the peaceful, affluent atmosphere of my mother's Atlanta neighborhood. The scene at the suburban mansion was a masterclass in total public humiliation. Flashing red and blue police lights bounced aggressively off the pristine white columns of the estate, painting the perfectly manicured lawn in the colors of a criminal raid. 3 Fulton County Sheriff vehicles were parked haphazardly across the driveway, blocking any chance of escape. My mother was completely unhinged. She stood on the front porch wearing her silk morning robe, her feet shoved into expensive designer slippers, frantically waving her arms at the team of burly movers marching through her front door. They were executing the court-ordered eviction with ruthless mechanical efficiency. 2 men carried out her prized custom velvet sofa, dumping it unceremoniously onto the concrete curb. Another mover hauled out the imported crystal vases and the heavy antique dining chairs where just weeks earlier she had tried to force me to sign away my grandmother's legacy. Her precious status symbols, the physical manifestations of her fake generational wealth, were being tossed onto the street like discarded garbage. "You cannot do this!" Vivian shrieked at the leading sheriff deputy, her voice cracking as she desperately tried to block the doorway. "I am a pillar of this community. I am a senior member of the church planning committee. My son is a highly successful logistics CEO. There has been a massive banking error." The sheriff simply adjusted his utility belt, stepping around her frantic flailing. "Ma'am, the property belongs to Obsidian Real Estate Holdings. The owner executed a 24-hour eviction notice due to unauthorized occupation. Step aside or you will be arrested for interfering with a court order." Vivian stumbled back, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. But the true horror was not the loss of her furniture. The true horror was the audience. The flashing police lights had drawn out every single wealthy, gossipy neighbor on the block. They were standing on their pristine lawns, watching the great Vivian Vance get thrown into the street. Standing right at the edge of the property line was Sister Margaret, the head of the church gossip circle and Pastor Davis's wife. They were not offering help or praying for her salvation. They were holding up their smartphones, recording every single humiliating second of her downfall in high definition. The carefully crafted facade of the blessed wealthy matriarch that Vivian had spent decades building was utterly destroyed in front of the exact people she spent her entire life trying to impress. Vivian realized Marcus was completely useless. He was still on the other end of the phone, weeping in a Manhattan boardroom, stripped of his own fake empire. She hung up on him. She needed the only person who actually possessed the power to stop the movers. She needed the scapegoat she had spent 32 years punishing. I was stepping into the private elevator of the Preston Global Imports building, my legal team flanking me, when my cell phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. It was Vivian. I pressed accept and put the call on speakerphone, holding the device up so my chief operating officer, Sarah, could hear the glorious sound of consequences. Maya Vivian sobbed hysterically the moment the call connected. Her arrogant, commanding tone had completely vanished, replaced by the frantic, pathetic begging of a cornered animal. "Maya, please tell them to stop. The sheriff is here. They are putting my mattress on the sidewalk. Sister Margaret is recording me. Maya, you have to call the bank. You have to stop this right now." I stepped into the elevator, my heels clicking sharply against the polished metal floor. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single ounce of comfort. "You are not dealing with a bank, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy calm. "You are dealing with the owner of the property. I executed the eviction." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, filled only with the distant sound of movers dropping a heavy wooden dresser onto the pavement. Then the ultimate black tax guilt trip erupted from the speaker. "How can you do this to your own mother?" Vivian screamed, her voice vibrating with desperate, toxic entitlement. "I gave birth to you. I put clothes on your back. I kept a roof over your head when you were a child. I sacrificed my youth to raise you into the woman you are today. You owe me everything, Maya. You owe me your life. You cannot leave your own flesh and blood homeless on the street." I let the elevator doors slide shut, sealing me in a quiet metallic box. As we descended to the lobby, I let her weaponized maternal guilt hang in the air, refusing to absorb a single drop of it. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied, my words striking like physical blows. "Do you remember when I was 18 years old, Mom? I was lying in a bed at Atlanta General Hospital, struggling to breathe because my lungs were filling with fluid from severe pneumonia. The doctors said I needed aggressive intravenous antibiotics immediately, or I could suffer permanent respiratory damage. The medical bill was exactly $500. Vivian stopped crying, her breath catching in her throat as the memory hit her. I begged you to pay it. I continued, methodically dismantling her pathetic illusion of motherhood. I begged you to help me breathe. But you stood in my hospital room, looked at your desperately sick daughter, and told me you did not have the cash. You told me I had to wait and fight off the infection myself. But you did have the cash, Mom. You had exactly $5,000 sitting in your checking account. I know, because the very next day you marched into a luxury boutique and spent every single penny of it buying Marcus a solid gold Rolex for graduating from a mediocre college with a business degree he barely earned. You let me choke on my own failing lungs so your golden child could wear a status symbol on his wrist. Maya, please, Vivian whimpered, her voice shrinking into a pathetic, hollow whisper. That was a long time ago. I made a mistake. It was not a mistake, I corrected sharply. It was a choice. You chose your priorities then, and I am choosing my priorities now. You want to talk about what flesh and blood owes each other. You want to cash in on the maternal sacrifices you never actually made. Well, I am formally closing your account. Blood is not an unlimited credit card, Mom, and your balance is permanently denied. I pressed the red button on my screen, instantly severing the connection. I slid the phone back into my pocket as the elevator pinged, signaling our arrival at the ground floor. The toxic ties were finally and completely cut. Exactly 1 month after I closed the Tokyo merger, my life moved into a stratosphere of unprecedented peace. Down in Atlanta, however, the reality of their choices violently settled into the dirt. The punishing southern heat beat down on Marcus as he dragged a heavy cardboard box out of the back of a battered delivery van. The golden boy who once bragged about global logistics empires was now wearing a sweat-stained polyester uniform. He worked a grueling 10-hour shift for a massive retail shipping company, dropping off packages in the exact gated communities he used to frequent. As he dropped a box onto a porch, his cracked smartphone buzzed. It was payday. Marcus eagerly opened his banking app, desperate to see his meager earnings so he could afford a hot meal. Instead, he stared at the screen as a notification popped up. Half of his paycheck was automatically deducted the second it hit his account. A massive red negative sign flashed, explicitly citing a court-ordered wage garnishment executed by Obsidian Capital Legal Division. My lawyers were relentless, tracking every single dime he made to slowly pay off the millions he attempted to steal from me. He dropped his head against the steering wheel, weeping silently, knowing he would be trapped in this cycle of manual labor and poverty forever. Chloe was faring no better in her sudden descent into the working class. The grand illusion of her generational wealth had been completely pulverized. After her father narrowly avoided federal indictment by surrendering his entire import-export company to my firm, her family was left financially destitute. Chloe was stripped of her trust fund, her luxury vehicles, and her limitless credit cards. She was now living in the damp, unfinished basement of her parents' shrinking suburban home. The woman who once sat in my penthouse mocking my clothing was currently standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of a fast fashion retail store in a crowded mall. She wore a cheap nylon uniform, aggressively folding graphic t-shirts on a clearance table. A teenage customer snapped her fingers at Chloe, demanding she check the back room for a smaller size. Chloe gritted her teeth, forcing a subservient smile, swallowing the bitter taste of reality. When she retreated to the dingy employee break room, she broke down. She deployed her trademark white tears, sobbing into her hands, hoping a manager would take pity on her. But no one cared. Her tears held zero currency in the real world. She checked her phone, desperately hoping for a lifeline. She had blocked Marcus weeks ago, but her former country club friends were deliberately leaving her messages on read. She was a social pariah, entirely discarded by the elite circle she used to weaponize against me. The most spectacular downfall, however, belonged to my mother. Vivian and Thomas were now renting a cramped, deeply unappealing two-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta. The constant wail of police sirens replaced the serene quiet of their former gated community. Vivian spent her days pacing the cheap linoleum floors, staring at the peeling paint, unable to process her new reality. But her delusion was stubborn. When Sunday morning rolled around, Vivian refused to accept her exile. She dug into her remaining wardrobe, pulling out her most extravagant floral dress and her widest-brimmed church hat. She forced Thomas into his only remaining suit and demanded he drive them to the Excellence in Leadership Church. Vivian marched through the heavy oak doors of the sanctuary, holding her chin high, desperately attempting to project her former matriarchal glory. She headed straight for the front pews, the premium seating reserved for the highest tithe payers and community leaders. But as she walked down the center aisle, the atmosphere in the church shifted. The lively gospel music seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the deafening sound of aggressive whispering. Sister Margaret stood near the altar talking with the pastor-wife. Vivian approached them, extending her arms for a warm embrace, sporting her falsest, brightest smile. Sister Margaret stopped talking. She looked Vivian up and down, her eyes filled with absolute icy contempt. Without saying a single word, Sister Margaret and the pastor-wife physically turned their backs on my mother, shutting her out completely. A junior usher quickly intercepted Vivian, gently but firmly placing a hand on her arm. He informed her that her usual seat had been reassigned and redirected her to the overflow folding chairs in the very back of the sanctuary. Vivian sat in the cheap metal chair, her face burning with profound humiliation as the congregation openly stared and pointed. They knew about the police cars on her lawn. They knew about the eviction. They knew her son was a fraud. She was entirely exiled from high society, stripped of the only thing she truly valued. Her kingdom was ashes. While Vivian sat in the back of the church, suffocating in her public disgrace, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb of a very familiar property in the affluent suburbs. I stepped out of the back seat wearing a sharp charcoal pantsuit, the morning sun catching the gold watch on my wrist. I stood on the sidewalk looking at the massive Atlanta mansion I had purchased 3 years ago. I was not holding boxes. I was not moving in. The manicured lawn was completely destroyed, replaced by the heavy treads of industrial machinery. A construction foreman in a hard hat walked up to me, handing me a clipboard for my final authorization signature. I signed the work order, handing it back to him with a cool, satisfied smile. I looked up at the pristine white columns and the large bay windows where my family used to plot my downfall. A massive yellow excavator swung its mechanical arm forward, smashing directly into the front porch. They were tearing down the walls. I watched the structure collapse, knowing my real life began now. The excavator's strike was not a demolition of the foundation, but the violent eradication of the toxic facade my mother had built. I instructed the construction crews to gut the entire interior down to the wooden studs. We ripped out the heavy imported marble kitchen island, where Vivian had ordered me to sign away my future. We tore down the restrictive walls of the formal dining room, where she used to hold court and humiliate me for sport. We shattered the crystal chandeliers that had cast a pretentious glow over decades of emotional abuse. In their place, we built something entirely new. Over the next 6 months, the suffocating status-obsessed suburban estate was completely transformed into the Obsidian Vanguard Incubator. It was a multi-million-dollar trust and innovation hub specifically designed to fund, mentor, and elevate young Black women and BIPOC entrepreneurs who had been systemically overlooked by traditional Wall Street gatekeepers. Tonight was the grand opening. The sprawling space that once echoed with Chloe's racist microaggressions and Marcus's hollow bragging was now vibrating with the relentless, brilliant energy of 50 ambitious women. The former master suite was now a high-tech pitching room equipped with interactive smartboards and global conferencing software. The expansive backyard, where my mother had mourned her precious Japanese hydrangeas, was covered by a massive glass pavilion housing collaborative workspaces and bold art installations by local Black creators. I walked through the main hall, handing a flute of sparkling cider to a 22-year-old software developer who had just secured her first $1 million seed round directly from my firm. She hugged me tightly, her eyes shining with tears of genuine gratitude. Laughter filled the air around us. It was a rich, supportive, and authentic sound, a stark contrast to the forced, sycophantic giggles my mother used to demand from her church friends whenever she hosted her miserable elite social gatherings. I stood near the newly installed floating glass staircase, holding a glass of mineral water looking across the massive open atrium. The physical transformation was stunning, but the spiritual cleansing of the property was what truly mattered to me. I remembered a Thanksgiving dinner a decade ago happening in the exact physical location where I was currently standing. I was 22 years old, working double shifts at a local diner, just trying to pay off the college tuition Marcus had stolen from me. I had arrived at the house still wearing my diner uniform, smelling of industrial bleach and fryer grease, exhausted to my bones and just wanting a warm plate of holiday food. Vivian had intercepted me at the front door. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin, and forced me to eat a plate of cold leftovers sitting alone in the laundry room. She claimed my uniform and my exhaustion would embarrass her in front of the wealthy deacons she had invited to the main dining room. She actually looked me in the eye and told me that poverty was contagious, and she refused to let my struggle infect her pristine aesthetic. She chose her social standing over her starving daughter without a single second of hesitation. I looked around the room now, banishing the ghost of that memory. The women standing here tonight were not wearing designer labels bought on high-interest credit cards like my family used to do. They were wearing confidence earned through sheer grit and undeniable talent. They were discussing tech startups, sustainable agriculture, and international trade. I had not just bought a house, I had purchased a burial ground for generational trauma and built a sanctuary of empowerment directly over it. I had replaced the suffocating demands of the black tax with a system that actually generated real sustainable wealth for people who deserved it. A sudden sharp vibration at my wrist broke my peaceful reflection. My smartwatch displayed an urgent notification from the estate's newly upgraded perimeter security team. I tapped my wireless earpiece, stepping slightly away from the lively networking event and moving toward the quiet corridor of my private office. Boss David's voice came through the secure channel, low and rigidly professional. "We have an unauthorized individual at the main front gate. He bypassed the outer neighborhood security checkpoint on foot and is currently refusing to leave the immediate perimeter. He is aggressively requesting to speak with you directly." I frowned, glancing at the floor-to-ceiling windows. A heavy torrential downpour had just begun to pound against the glass pavilion outside, turning the night sky into a dark, freezing storm. "Did he give a name?" I asked, signaling for Sarah to take over my hosting duties with a quick wave of my hand. "No name required, boss," David replied, his tone completely flat. "I am looking at the high-definition security feed right now. It is your brother." I pulled up the live security camera application on my smartphone screen. The night visions illuminated the heavy iron gates at the entrance of my property. Standing in the freezing torrential rain was Marcus, the golden boy of the family, the man who had confidently marched into my Manhattan penthouse to steal millions of dollars. Was completely unrecognizable. He was wearing his sweat-stained bright yellow delivery driver uniform, completely soaked to the bone by the freezing rain. His shoulders were hunched in defeat, and his face was pressed desperately against the cold wrought iron bars of the gate. He looked like a drowned rat, stripped of every ounce of his former arrogant glory. The custom-tailored suits and expensive watches were entirely gone, replaced by the harsh, grim reality of his minimum-wage existence. He was shivering violently, the cold water plastering the cheap polyester fabric directly to his skin. He kept wiping his face, trying to clear the heavy rain from his eyes, but he refused to step away from the barrier. He simply stood there, staring into the security camera lens, knowing I was watching him. He raised a sad, dripping, crushed bouquet of cheap grocery store flowers up toward the camera lens, a desperate, pathetic offering from a man who had absolutely nothing left to his name. The trap he built for me had completely swallowed him whole. I handed my tablet back to David and stepped away from the warmth of the crowded atrium. "Grab an umbrella," I told him. "I am going down to the gate." David immediately moved to flank me, his hand resting near his radio, but I shook my head. "No, stay here. I will handle this alone." I pulled a heavy black umbrella from the brass stand near the entrance and pushed the front doors open. The torrential rain hit the pavement with a deafening roar, a freezing southern storm washing over the property. I walked down the long, curving driveway, the sound of my heels muted by the heavy downpour. The iron gates loomed ahead, towering and resolute, acting as an impenetrable barrier between the empire I had built and the parasitic past I had buried. Marcus pressed his face against the wet metal bars as I approached. He looked absolutely wretched, The cheap yellow polyester of his delivery uniform clung to his shivering frame, entirely soaked through by the freezing rain. His shoes were covered in mud, and his hands trembled violently as he clutched a pathetic crushed bouquet of grocery store carnations. The plastic wrapping around the flowers was filled with rainwater dripping onto his worn-out boots. When he saw me step into the dim halo of the security floodlights, a desperate manic relief washed over his face. "Maya," he gasped, his voice cracking and weak against the howling wind. "Oh, thank God. Thank God you came out here." I stopped 3 feet away from the gate. I did not unlock it. I did not punch in the security code. I simply stood under the wide canopy of my black umbrella, perfectly dry and perfectly composed, looking at him through the thick iron bars. Marcus pushed the soggy bouquet through the gap in the metal. "I brought you these," he stammered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "I know it is the grand opening of your foundation. I know I am not on the guest list, but I wanted to show my support. I wanted to tell you how incredibly proud I am of you, Maya. You built something amazing here." I did not reach for the flowers. I kept my free hand buried in the pocket of my tailored trousers. "You are trespassing, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the rain with lethal precision. My security team was about to call the police. "You have 2 minutes to tell me why I should not let them." He let out a jagged, hyperventilating sob, dropping the flowers onto the wet asphalt. "Maya, please," he begged, gripping the iron bars so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You have to stop the wage garnishments. I cannot survive like this. I am working 14-hour shifts, hauling heavy boxes up endless flights of stairs. By the time your lawyers take their 50%, I barely have enough money to buy groceries. Chloe abandoned me. Mom and Dad will not even answer my phone calls. I am living in a miserable studio apartment with black mold on the ceiling. I have absolutely nothing left. I am drowning, Maya." He waited for a reaction, his eyes searching my face for any flicker of the obedient, empathetic little sister he used to manipulate for sport. When my expression remained entirely blank, he shifted his tactic, pivoting to the exact same weapon our mother used: nostalgia and blood. "We are family, Maya," he pleaded, pressing his wet face against the cold iron. "We share the same blood. Do you remember when we were kids? Do you remember how I used to walk you home from elementary school when the older kids tried to bully you? I was your big brother. I protected you. I know I made mistakes. I know I got greedy. But I was just trying to build a legacy for our family. I wanted to make us powerful. Please, Maya, look into your heart. I am begging you for one last chance. Sister to brother, just forgive the debt and let me start over." His performance was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. He completely omitted the fact that he only walked me home from school because our mother paid him to do it, and he regularly stole my lunch money as a fee. He conveniently forgot that his pursuit of a family legacy involved committing federal wire fraud and attempting to steal my entire net worth. He wanted a clean slate without doing a single ounce of the actual work required to earn one. I looked at the shivering, broken man on the other side of the gate. I did not yell. I did not curse at him. I did not recount the decades of psychological torture he had gleefully participated in. Yelling implies an emotional investment. Anger requires energy, and I had absolutely zero energy left to spend on Marcus. I looked him dead in the eye, my face a mask of complete and total indifference. "I am not angry with you, Marcus," I said, my voice eerily calm, carrying clearly over the storm. "I do not hate you. I do not wish you harm." A spark of hope flared in his eyes. He let out a wet, gasping sigh of relief, thinking his pathetic manipulation had actually worked. "You mean it," he whispered. "I mean it," I replied smoothly. "I do not hate you because hating you requires caring about you, and I simply do not care that you exist. You are not my brother. You are just a man who owes me a substantial amount of money. You will continue to deliver boxes in the rain. You will continue to surrender half your paycheck to my legal team. You will do this until your debt is paid in full, and then you will disappear back into whatever miserable life you have created for yourself. That is the only relationship we will ever have." The spark of hope in his eyes instantly extinguished, replaced by a hollow, crushing despair. He realized in that exact moment that his tears held absolutely no currency here. The endless well of my forgiveness had completely dried up. Maya, wait. Maya, wait, he cried out as I turned my back on him. Please do not walk away. You cannot leave me out here. I am your blood. I did not pause my stride. I did not look over my shoulder. I walked steadily back up the curving driveway, my heels clicking methodically against the wet pavement. Behind me, Marcus completely shattered. He collapsed against the heavy iron gate, his hands desperately clawing at the unyielding metal bars. He screamed my name into the freezing rain, sobbing with the raw, agonizing realization that he was permanently locked out of my world. He would never have access to my light, my wealth, or my life ever again. He was trapped in the storm of his own making. I reached the front doors of the pavilion and handed my wet umbrella to a waiting security guard. I smoothed the lapels of my suit and stepped back into the glowing, vibrant warmth of the Innovation Hub. The air inside was thick with joyous laughter, clinking glasses, and the empowering conversations of brilliant women building the future. I took a deep, cleansing breath, letting the incredible energy of my chosen family wash over me. A distinguished man, in an impeccably tailored suit, approached me from the crowd holding two crystal flutes of sparkling cider. It was Elias Sterling, the billionaire mentor, who had stepped out of the helicopter on this exact property a year ago. He handed me a glass, his sharp eyes studying my serene expression. He raised his glass slightly, gesturing toward the front windows where the storm raged outside. "Is everything okay out there?" Elias asked, his tone carrying a note of quiet respect. "Everything is perfect," I replied, taking the crystal flute from his hand. The crisp, sweet cider mirrored the absolute clarity blooming in my chest. I just finished taking out the trash. Elias let out a low, knowing chuckle. He clinked his glass against mine. "Good. Clutter is terrible for business, and it is even worse for the soul. You cannot build a $1 billion empire while carrying the dead weight of people who refuse to walk." I turned to look at the spectacular room I had built from the ashes of my mother's pretension. The Obsidian Vanguard incubator was alive and thriving. To my left, Sarah was finalizing a massive term sheet with a brilliant 23-year-old software developer. Near the floating glass staircase, a group of Black women founders were exchanging venture capital strategies, their laughter rich, vibrant, and entirely unburdened. This was my chosen family. They did not demand my wealth as a prerequisite for their love. They did not expect me to shrink my ambitions so they could feel tall in my presence. We elevated each other based on mutual respect and shared brilliance. The time had come to address the room. I walked over to the center of the atrium, signaling the audio technician to lower the ambient jazz music. The conversations naturally hushed as 50 incredible driven women turned their attention toward me. I did not need a microphone. The perfect acoustics of the glass pavilion carried my voice with crisp authority. "Thank you all for being here tonight." I began, my voice steady and echoing with undeniable power. "When I purchased this property, it was built on a crumbling foundation of conditional love and suffocating expectations. It was a physical monument to the black tax. It represented the destructive idea that if you succeed, you owe your very life force to the people who share your bloodline, even if those same people deliberately tried to starve you." I looked around the room, making direct eye contact with the women who understood that exact agonizing struggle. "For generations, we have been told that family loyalty is absolute," I declared. "We have been conditioned from childhood to carry the heavy weight of toxic relatives, to absorb their financial ruin, and to accept their emotional abuse as the mandatory cost of admission to the family table. We are taught to break our own backs to build thrones for people who would gladly watch us drown, just to save themselves. We are told that blood is thicker than water. But they forget that loyalty without respect is just a hostage situation." A powerful murmur of agreement washed through the crowd. "But tonight we break that generational curse," I continued, my voice rising with absolute conviction. "We reject the narrative that blood demands your silence. We reject the manufactured guilt that tells you your hard-earned success belongs to someone else's fragile ego. Your brilliance, your wealth, and your peace are yours to protect. You define your own worth completely outside of familial expectations. You do not owe your light to people who aggressively insist on living in the dark." The room erupted in applause. The applause was not polite corporate clapping. It was a fierce, thunderous roar of liberation. Elias nodded from the back of the room, a proud, quiet acknowledgement from a man who had watched me transform from a defensive survivor into an absolute titan of industry. This building is no longer a monument to toxic legacy, I concluded, raising my glass high into the air. It is a fortress for our future. We are the undisputed architects of our own empires. To the vanguard. To the vanguard. 50 voices echoed back, raising their glasses in perfect victorious unison. The celebration hit a magnificent crescendo. I signaled to Sarah, who immediately directed the catering staff to open the massive sliding glass doors leading to the sprawling backyard. The torrential rain from earlier had miraculously cleared, leaving the night air crisp and electric. The violent storm was over both literally and metaphorically. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced loudly, "if you will please direct your attention to the terrace, our founder has one final surprise to conclude the evening." The crowd filtered out onto the expansive patio, murmuring with eager excitement. I stood at the edge of the terrace, looking out over the perfectly manicured landing pad that had permanently replaced my mother's ruined garden. Suddenly, a familiar, deep mechanical hum vibrated through the solid ground beneath our feet. The sound rapidly escalated into a deafening, magnificent roar. The wind whipped across the patio, catching the skirts of designer gowns and sending chaotic ripples across the surface of the infinity pool. But this was not the corporate Sikorsky from a year ago. Descending from the clear night sky was a brand new custom-designed Airbus private helicopter. The aircraft was painted in a stunning iridescent midnight blue, sleek and utterly flawless. Emblazoned across the tail was not a corporate logo, but a stylized geometric crown, my personal crest. The crowd gasped and cheered as the magnificent machine touched down seamlessly on the landing pad. The side doors glided open, revealing a meticulously crafted luxury interior, featuring plush white leather seating, custom ambient lighting, and a fully stocked champagne bar. Elias walked up beside me, leaning close to be heard over the winding down of the jet engines. "An excellent acquisition," he noted with genuine approval. "Where are we heading tonight?" "The Amalfi Coast," I replied smoothly. "I rented a private villa for the executive team and the top founders from the incubator. We are celebrating our success exactly the way we deserve to." I turned to Sarah and the chosen family I had meticulously built. They were glowing with unadulterated excitement, completely untethered from the burdens of their pasts. "Grab your bags, ladies," I called out over the engines. "Our ride is here." I walked across the damp grass, my expensive heels stepping precisely where Marcus had once knelt and begged for a pathetic bailout. I did not look back at the heavy iron gates. I did not wonder if he was still standing out there in the cold. I boarded the aircraft, taking the premium window seat. The pilot initiated the takeoff sequence. The massive engines roared back to full life, lifting the helicopter effortlessly into the dark, star-filled sky. As we ascended, the sprawling city of Atlanta spread out beneath us like a glittering grid of infinite possibilities. I looked down at the dark suburban streets, where my mother used to parade her false wealth, where my brother used to run his fraudulent schemes, and where they both now lived in total miserable exile. They were somewhere down there, permanently trapped in the microscopic reality they had built for themselves. I sat back in the plush leather seat and accepted a crystal flute of vintage champagne from the flight attendant. The cabin was filled with the joyous, unburdened laughter of my chosen family. I took a slow, satisfying sip of the champagne. The taste was absolute perfection. I was untouchable. I was completely unbothered. I was entirely self-made. I looked out the window at the brilliant city skyline, a soft, triumphant smile spreading across my face. The world was finally mine. The screen fades to black on that profound, unbreakable peace. True family is not defined by blood, especially when that blood demands your silence, finances, and sanity. The ultimate lesson here is that breaking generational curses requires the immense courage to walk away from toxic loyalty. Your worth is not determined by relatives who constantly belittle you just to elevate themselves. When you stop setting yourself on fire to keep manipulative people warm, you finally create space to build your own empire. True power comes from absolute financial and emotional independence. Have you ever had to cut toxic family ties to protect your peace? Share your story below and subscribe.